As a law enforcement agency, the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office was created to protect and serve. But at the turn of this new century, a political movement gained steam, angry at what they said was federal inaction. This brought on a shift in culture that changed the MCSO, caused a political fight, and created a constant media circus in Maricopa County.
It's the feeling that at any time you could be targeted. You could even be the subject of violence just because of who you are.
The leadership of the sheriff's office was at the forefront of the battle. It grew to overwhelm the county, as well as the state of Arizona, stoking fear. The lines were drawn, dividing the community. After a lengthy courtroom litigation, the court held that some of the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office operations violated the plaintiff class action rights under the 4th and 14th Amendments to the United States Constitution. The office is now implementing court-ordered reforms to prevent racially biased policing. Those include establishing an early intervention system, conducting traffic stop analysis, and others. Since 1871, the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office has patrolled the county. The goal? To serve the community and enforce the law. With nearly 4.5 million people, Maricopa County is the 4th most populous county in the United States. 1/3 of the population identifies as Hispanic. The county is a massive tract of land, stretched over 9,000 square miles. It's bigger than 4 U.S. states. With a county so large in population and size, Maricopa has some of the richest and poorest areas in the state. Deputies work every inch of this county. They not only protect its residents, but hope to work hand in hand to create a better community. This diverse county has small towns, bedroom communities, and of course Phoenix, the 5th largest city in America. The Sheriff's Office is in charge of the jail system and is the sole law enforcement provider for a handful of towns. The office has roughly 3,300 employees and a budget of nearly $400 million. For years, many felt MCSO maintained a great relationship with the community. The sheriff is an elected position. Every 4 years, residents go to the polls to decide who will be the chief law enforcement officer of the county. Joseph Arpaio was first elected in 1992, labeling himself as tough on crime. Arpaio was popular across the political landscape.
And he was a law enforcement officer at his core to begin with. But he was also sort of a fun guy, an exciting personality, a big personality. And he found that his personality really resonated with the voters, and it really worked with the media. And he became addicted to that media attention. He just craved it, and it worked for him. The more media attention he got, the better he felt, and the more votes he got.
A showman at heart, Arpaio saw this tough-on-crime messaging as an important part of maintaining the office of the sheriff.
So Arpaio rode to victory, initially really as a moderate, trying to bring professionalism, though the sheriff had his own style. But then, I guess, caught up in this wave of PR and publicity, started to go off on his own once he was elected.
When I first met Sheriff, and I followed the sheriff for 8 years. For 8 years we've tracked him around and watched this happen before our eyes. When I first met him, he said, "I'm not going to go around arresting dishwashers and gardeners. That's an immigration issue. That's a federal issue." And he was very, very popular in the Hispanic community, and he was very popular with new immigrants because they would come to him, they trusted him. He wasn't about to arrest them for immigration status. He was about protecting the community, and they believed that, and they believed him.
After the events of 9/11, many Americans were shocked, afraid, and felt vulnerable. This fear began to manifest into anti-immigration sentiments. This sense of fear was stoked by politicians and public figures, such as Sheriff Arpaio, who found a divisive issue on which they could win elections. Many started to notice that this fearful movement had morphed from an anti-immigrant movement to an anti-Latino movement.
There was a point where Arpaio was favored with the immigrants. I remember going to an award ceremony where we awarded him because he protected the rights of immigrants when he stood up against Patrick Hobb. There was a lot of anti-immigrant, anti-foreigner, anti-people that don't look or sound like us. That's the us versus them. And there was a clear division. And there was a lot of chatter and rhetoric. But here in Maricopa County, it became really, really center when, after Patrick Hobb, all those patriots started accusing Arpaio of being unpatriotic.
One instance in Maricopa County involved a citizen, Patrick Hobb. On April 10, 2005, Patrick Hobb initiated a citizen's arrest against what he suspected were illegal immigrants crossing the Arizona desert in a Chevy Suburban.
An incident where a guy held people that he had perceived to be undocumented immigrants at gunpoint. Arpaio had him arrested. It was in Maricopa County, and Andrew Thomas let him out. Wouldn't charge him for it.
The Maricopa County Sheriff's Office arrested Hobb, and he spent 3 days in jail. But County Attorney Andrew Thomas did not file charges. Arpaio stood by his deputies.
That was a big thing. It was like, well, Sheriff Arpaio a lot of people thought that he was on their side up until everything blew up.
And that's when he switched. And suddenly, unpatriotic was, in order to fix, or being accused of being unpatriotic, you had to attack the immigrant. And that's when we started seeing that clear division. We started seeing, let's arrest them all up. They were using terms like illegals, report them, deport them, they're taking our jobs. And they were it was just nothing but dog whistles.
Some see this as a turning point, a place where Arpaio realized that being tough on immigration could be a great political push. It was the same wave the County Attorney Andrew Thomas rode to his election win.
So once we started seeing that these measures were taking place on the ballots, and candidates and elected officials started seeing that this was what was winning on the ballots, they knew that if they wanted to get reelected or win a post, they had to jump on that bandwagon. And Joe Arpaio was no different. Before he was a sheriff, he was an elected official.
I started my career in a small newspaper that was very rooted in the community, and we published in Spanish. It's called La Voz. And we were covering the sheriff's office just like any other news outlet back in 2003. But right around 2005, we started to see a shift in the way that the sheriff's office was implementing things related to immigration. And I think it had to do with basically a boom. A lot of local politicians, including the Maricopa County Attorney, Andrew Thomas, were really impressing on voters the idea that they were going to fight to stop illegal immigration, which was a really interesting concept, because you wonder, how is a local law enforcement officer going to stop illegal immigration when that is a federal issue, right? So I think right around 2005, Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, specifically Sheriff Joe Arpaio, saw that that was something important with Arizona voters and started to tap into that issue by enforcing some of our local state laws, such as the human smuggling law.
Not everywhere in the United States is the sheriff an elected position, but here the person in charge has to be popularly elected. Nobody understood this more than Joe Arpaio.
You know what? The media never gives me a break.
Arpaio consistently won elections, but in a fight for screen time and a want to energize his base, Arpaio's tough-on-crime message started to focus almost exclusively on illegal immigration. Also, with the election of Barack Obama in 2008, many saw that race began to play a bigger role in what has been called fear politics. 287G was part of the federal immigration program brought in during the Clinton administration. Allowing federal and local agencies to work together was not a new concept, but in the new century, leadership in Maricopa County saw it as a way to overcome what they saw as a lack of federal inaction when it came to immigration.
287G, it's been around for many years. And it's not a law, but it was a memorandum of understanding, basically a contract between the federal government and the state authorities. At the time that the sheriff's office signed that contract with ICE, we already had a lot of other law enforcement agencies around the country that were signing these memorandums of understanding, known as 287Gs, but also in order for them to enforce immigration law within the jails. So they used it in order to detect people that were coming into the jails without documents and, ask a certain number of questions, and that way they could hold those people so ICE could come and pick them up. So that was the main purpose that 287G was being used. And there is a precedent before the sheriffs of other sheriffs around the country using those types of agreements. But at the time in 2007, I remember there was a press conference that I attended with the head of ICE at that time and Governor Napolitano and Sheriff Joe Arpaio at the office of the governor, announcing that there was going to be a shift. There was going to be collaboration in order to fight illegal immigration. And then shortly after that, the sheriff announced, look, I'm signing this agreement with ICE. We're going to train 160 of our deputies to enforce immigration laws, and we're going to go after illegal immigrants. And that was very controversial because ICE had to come back and clarify that the sheriff couldn't just simply go after undocumented immigrants first. There had to be a reason for them to come in contact with the people, a reason for the stop, and a reason for them to even be questioned.
And then 287G, the immigration contracts that jails had to identify immigrants. And then you start hearing family members and people who are Native American, people who are legal documented citizens, and people who have had generations here in Arizona start getting caught up in that net, start getting identified as immigrants. And then you start hearing in protests, people calling you immigrant or illegal. I'm a Native American and I have several generations here in the state of Arizona.
I think Guadalupe really sticks out to a lot of us because Guadalupe was an explosion of the clash. And I think what Arpaio did was unleash not only his deputies but his posse into a 3 square mile area. And he told them, go out and fetch me some Mexicans to deport.
What was different about Guadalupe? It was outrage. I mean, they were freaked out. It's like women that lived there all their lives were walking their children home from the store and getting pulled over asking, where's your papers? What do you mean, where's my papers? I'm Hopi, or I'm a Yaqui Native American that's lived here in this town all my life. And now they're being, well, you have to have papers to walk.
When they were profiled, it was because of the color of their skin. And this was offensive. Not only was it offensive, but the way that it was done. When you have all of those deputies and posse members out roaming those streets and crawling those streets, they couldn't come back empty-handed. They had to come back and bring folks with them. And they drug with them some folks that were Pascuayaki, just because they weren't carrying their ID. Some folks that were stopped while walking, and they were asked to produce documentation.
Guadalupe is a small town surrounded by its much larger neighbors, Phoenix, Tempe, and Chandler. Around 1900, a group of indigenous Pascuayaki who were fleeing Mexico put down stakes in this patch of land. To this day, nearly half of its residents are Native American, and nearly 75% of the population identifies as Hispanic. Sadly, nearly a quarter of the population of Guadalupe is below the poverty line, but the town continues to persevere, centered around family and community. The town's motto is, "Where three cultures flourish." As one of the towns that is patrolled by the sheriff's office, it looks to the MCSO as its only law enforcement agency, but many residents saw themselves as oppressed.
Guadalupe was a community that was caught between a rock and a hard place because when the sheriff's office came in to do some of the sweeps, and it's so tiny too, a lot of U.S. citizens were pulled over. That's no secret, right? And then these are communities that are also indigenous, that have deep roots here in Arizona, from way before Arizona was Arizona, right? So that's what made it so appalling to a lot of people. But the problem was the sheriff became upset when he was confronted about the sweeps, and then threatened the town with taking away the very protections of law enforcement. And so for months, they were sort of left up in the air, wondering who is going to protect us. Meanwhile, an investigation from reporters from the East Valley Tribune revealed at that time that while you were having those sweeps, there were cases in Guadalupe and also in other towns where the sheriff's office was the main law enforcement that were not being investigated. So you have, on the one hand, these large-scale sweeps where you're pull over U.S. citizens and people for minor traffic infractions. And then on the other hand, you have very serious crimes without, pretty much zero investigation. And the other problem, very slow response times. I think like the sheriff's office was being stretched very thin because a lot of the resources were being pulled over to do this immigration sweeps. And so they were also at a rough spot when it came to the enforcement of other things.
And he throws a U-turn. He starts telling my sister. And then they get behind her. And my sister's, well, I got insurance. I got it, She told me she was feeling a little nervous, but nothing more than, hey, late at night, I'm probably the only car in the street. The cop's going to watch me. And she pulls into her driveway all the way to the backyard because that's where she parks her van. She gets out of the van. Suddenly, the deputy pulls in really fast into the driveway, all the way to the backyard, turns on their lights, and orders them to go back into the car. And my sister's baffled. She's confused. So she takes 2 steps to the back door and starts knocking on the door for her mom to come out. And at that point, the deputy grabbed her. And then the other deputy was already putting her husband in handcuffs. And then the other deputy assisted. And they both tackled her to the ground. And then the cops are like, you can't come through here or else you're going to get arrested. And I look at them like they're already barking orders to the whole family. And my nephews, teenagers, watching their mom being held down. And my sister is just yelling and like, what, I didn't do nothing and this and that. And I think her husband was in handcuffs, so he couldn't do anything. And then they just pick her up. They tell us nothing. They put her in the back seat of the car, and then they pull out, and they leave. That's it. Deputies are there taking my sister out of the cop car, obviously all dusty, into the city hall, town hall, which has a substation in the back. And I'm there with my brother-in-law. And then they take her out of the substation. They put her back in the cop car. And we're wondering where are they going. So we go to her house, and sure enough, that's where the deputy's at. And they're letting my sister out of the back seat without her handcuffs on, and they pull away and they leave. And my sister, I've never seen her break down like that. And the minute she was let out of that vehicle, she broke down and started crying.
These saturation patrols, or crime suppression sweeps, started taking place all over the valley. The one thing they had in common was the makeup of the community. Almost every sweep took place in a predominantly Hispanic area. Saturation patrols were used to find minor infractions that gave deputies access to everyone in the car and made everyone a suspect.
It's well known, the power of authority. And when you work in an organization that is military-like and really honors authority, the person at the top has a great deal of power and makes a big difference on how everybody in that organization acts and reacts. I know that people spoke up and regretted it. And I know people did things that they would have normally regretted and ended up being rewarded.
Add to that, immigration raids on businesses pushed the boundaries of 287G, striking fear in the Latino community. Families were changed forever. It was something that tore at the very fabric of the community. Many people, including children, felt like they were the target of law enforcement, simply for being themselves.
But instead of going after the employers, the sheriff's office decided to go after the workers. And so we saw all of these announcements. He called the media. There was a sweep at a car wash. There was a raid at a water park. That was the very first one, a raid at a water park. So when I went to cover the raid at the water park, it was more than 60 people that were arrested. And a few nights after the press conference, I found myself at a trailer park talking to 10 to 12 women whose husbands had been detained. And they were terrified. They were terrified because the sheriff's office had gone not only to their workplace, but to their homes looking for them, right? And so you live in a trailer park, you have a lot of other people that might be undocumented. And then all of a sudden, there's a sheriff deputy, you know that they're enforcing some of the immigration laws. It was just so scary for everybody else, not just the people that work at the water park. So everybody was staying with someone else. And one of the things they told me is, my husband was working there. He was a cook in one of the kitchens, and he was also a maintenance person. He worked, 12 hours a day. He'd been working there for 10 years. And then, everybody had been working there for so long. So I asked myself, why did all of a sudden it became so urgent to go after those workers who've been working there for so long if it's not for political reasons? Why was it okay 10 years ago, 5 years ago? Why is it urgent right now?
Te quiero mucho, mami.
I heard there was a 9-year-old girl whose parents, both of them, mom and dad, were arrested in one of the sweeps. And she found out because she was at home, the TV was on, and she saw her mom and dad that were working on a car wash, walked out of the car wash in handcuffs, plastic handcuffs. That's how she finds out. And it makes you wonder how many other children witnessed something like that and how traumatic it was. So when I went to talk to her, went to talk to the family, I realized that, again, these parents have been working there for like 10, 12 years. It was not a case of identity theft. They were working with their real names. I researched the whole thing. And so nobody, they hadn't taken anybody else's identity or social security or anything. So I said, we have to make a documentary so people understand the ripple effects of this type of enforcement on communities, and that this type of enforcement has a cost for children, whether they are U.S. citizens or undocumented children. There's deep psychological trauma inferred in them when they see their mom and dad being detained. There was a moment that we were interviewing Catherine Figueroa, the little girl in the film. She was at a park. Her parents were still arrested. And it was the first time I sat down to interview her because, she's a child. It's just what was her understanding of what was going on? And how do you talk to them without really inflicting more trauma or hurting them? And so she said, I'm a U.S. citizen, but if they have to hide, I have to hide. And then one of the little girls just talked about her fear of the police. I kid you not, is in the film. She says, at night when we're driving with my parents, and if I see the lights of the police, if I see a police car, I bury my nails in my arms. I get so scared, and I keep looking back because I am so afraid that the police is going to come and get us. I mean, I kid you not, specifically, she lived in a state of fear.
Community leaders like Air Force veteran Salvador Reza began organizing protests and worked to protect day laborers, while anti-immigrant groups showed up creating even more of a spectacle. Maricopa County was spinning out of control, and many saw Arpaio and the MCSO as the ones creating that chaos.
So then there is the case of Maria del Carmen Garcia Martinez. She was doing a garage sale in her house, a yard sale. She forgot to take the signs that she put. Police comes over to her door, She's like, oh, I'm sorry. Well, I'm going to give you a citation. Give me your ID. She shows her a California driver's license. It was expired. Oh, no, this is fake. She gets arrested from her house, taken into the sheriff's office. And while in custody, they tried to fingerprint some sort of a form they wanted her to fingerprint with information. She's fearful. She's like, I don't want to sign my deportation. She doesn't want to sign the paper. They force her to sign the paper, and they break her arm. She resists putting the fingerprint on the paper, and in the process, in the scaffold, her arms gets broken. She's not taken to see anybody, to the hospital or anything like that. She's actually, hours later, turned over into ICE custody, where her attorney finds her with a swelling arm.
Today, the Department of Justice did something it has done only once before in the 18-year history of our civil police reform work.
In 2007, after years of applying a discriminatory culture against Latinos and the application of discriminatory policing, the legal consequences for the Sheriff's Office and Arpaio grew. That's when the American Civil Liberties Union filed the Melendrez class action lawsuit on behalf of the Latino residents of Maricopa County. The court found that the Sheriff's Office violated the plaintiff class's rights under the 4th and 14th Amendments of the United States Constitution. Soon, the federal government came out against Arpaio and the MCSO. In December of 2011, the U.S. Justice Department released its findings from a 3-year investigation, saying that the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office had a pervasive culture of discriminatory bias against Latinos that reaches the highest levels of the agency. After that, the federal government stripped the 287G program from the county. In May 2012, the Department of Justice sued the MCSO. The suit claimed the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office and Sheriff Joseph M. Arpaio have engaged and continue to engage in a pattern and practice of unlawful discriminatory police conduct directed at Latinos in Maricopa County, and jail practices that unlawfully discriminate against Latino prisoners with limited English language skills.
One of the things that really impressed me about the Melendrez story is that it was the first time that I realized what these saturation patrols were about. I've got an understanding of what they were doing. So Melendrez, he has a visa, he's a tourist. What was curious is that they questioned the passengers about their immigration status. And they questioned Melendrez. And Melendrez had a tourist visa. So when they reported this incident to the media, they said that they arrested X number of undocumented immigrants. There was no mention whatsoever that they had inadvertently arrested someone that was legally here in the United States. And then when further questioned, I was one of the people that called them to question. They had to correct themselves and said, no, wait, we arrested someone that was here legally. So they made a mistake. So why were they pulled over? Why were the passengers questioned? Because of the way they looked?
It was that simple. Melendrez had done nothing that would make him a suspect in a crime. The only reason he was detained was his skin color. That is racial profiling. Arpaio, still in command of the Sheriff's Office, saw himself constantly in courtroom battles. Judge Murray Snow started in 2011, first with an injunction that ordered the immigration patrols and raids to stop. Then in 2013, Judge Snow issued a ruling stating that the MCSO under Arpaio had been discriminating against people based solely on race. Even after this landmark ruling, problems continued. There is evidence of revenge against Judge Snow and Phoenix Mayor Phil Gordon and Councilman Andrew Sanchez and community activist, vocal critic, and County Commissioner Mary Rose Wilcox, along with her husband Earl. These retaliatory actions were not conducted solely by Joe Arpaio himself, but in many instances by deputies. The racially biased culture created by Sheriff Arpaio's administration made deputies feel unable or unwilling to say no to actions that were clearly wrong. Indeed, some were even rewarded with promotions and special treatment from the sheriff and his command staff. This level of corruption resulted in the harassment of communities and officials all over Maricopa County and infected the office itself.
To undo the training that ICE was given to our...
Later in 2016, Arpaio was personally held in criminal contempt of court for defying court orders. He was later pardoned by President Trump. Because of all the federal action against the sheriff's office, the MCSO had to now meet certain guidelines. A monitor was put in place to see that the court's orders would be adopted and implemented by the office. At this time, the MCSO is still working toward gaining full compliance with the provisions of the court order. The sheriff's office now works with a community advisory board to help build bridges with the Latino community. However, Arpaio doubled down, hoping that his show could carry him through another election. But even in a county carried by President Trump, Arpaio lost.
Arizona stands for something greater.
There was literally
That no
a
matter
new
where we
sheriff
come
in
from
town.
or what we look
However,
like,
to change a leader is one thing, but many fear the Arpaio culture corrupted the sheriff's office. And now the public is concerned about how quickly real change would come.
24 years, that institutionalizes a lot of stuff. And if people want to work, most people tend to listen to their immediate superior or boss. So this culture, which took a long time to build up, then takes a long time to go away.
But that's one of the hardest parts. There is no simple fix. MCSO joins the members of the community who still have concerns, such as the amount and average time of traffic stops involving people of color. In his written statement after MCSO's 5th Traffic Stop Annual Report, Sheriff Penzone says the report shows disparate outcomes in our traffic stops of minorities, similar to the outcomes found in our 4th TSAR, released on September 30th, 2019. As I have said before, these disparate outcomes are warning signs of potential racial bias in our patrol function, which has been and continues to be a major concern for the sheriff's office. These may be indicative of a systemic problem within our patrol function. MCSO has implemented policies that explicitly prohibit any bias-based policing. Today, the office is trying to strike a balance. Whether it's a balance with leadership or a balance in day-to-day law enforcement by deputies. It's a need to enforce the laws that exist, but to do so with a sense of scale. Is this action really serving our mission? Is this keeping the community safer? Is this treating every person in Maricopa County with dignity and respect?
I wish that there was a way to wave a magic wand and erase what happened, but there's no way to erase it, simply because when you've been hurt this much, it's hard to erase the fear. It's hard to erase the culture of looking in your rearview mirror and seeing that there's somebody behind you and wondering if they're going to pull you over for no reason but for the color of your skin. That's now what's happening, because it happens to me too.
For many in the community, the protection they craved was protection from their own sheriff's office. Those feelings are still very raw, still very new. Leadership can change in a single day, in a single election, but the sheriff's office realizes that it still has work to do to repair the ongoing consequences of the past and restore community trust. The office continues to work on programs to meet the court's orders, improve its practices, and earn back the respect of the people of Maricopa County.
It's emotional to me because my son's father is law enforcement. Because I grew up in a family where police officers and anyone in law enforcement and first responders are people to be admired and respected. And now kids, even my own son, said, I never want to be a police officer. I never want to be a cop. And this is the trust that was ripped apart from the dreams of a lot of kids. I want any and all police officers to be someone that the kids can look up to and say, I want to be someone like you.
MCSO entered into a partnership with this boxing gym 3 years ago, providing mentors and building bridges. What is it like here to be in the Guadalupe boxing gym working with the youth? For me, it's everything. My whole life I've dedicated myself to coaching Pop Warner, to coaching high school football, and it was an organic fit for me as a part of the sheriff's office to come into the boxing gym and to mentor these kids. We take it to the next level. I think it's important that they understand who we are as people before they understand who we are as deputies or people in uniforms. One of the ththings that I've learned from Sheriff Penzone is that's what he wants to create. He wants to create an environment that people trust their law enforcement agency and that we work hand in hand with one another, being accountable and doing things correctly.
The office continues to work on programs to meet the court's orders, improve its practices, and earn back the respect of the people of Maricopa County.
Since the court order, we've administered and implemented many different trainings for our folks out in patrol and throughout the organization. In 2015 is when we implemented our body-worn camera program. We've implemented 14 different classes for training. Part of those trainings are the annual 4th and 14th Amendment training, the bias-free policing training, the cultural competency training, and also supervisory training. We established a community outreach division whose job is to go out and connect with the community to build relationships and rebuild relationships. Technology has been improved to assist with data collection and analysis. Transparency is very important for the community and also for the organization. We conduct our annual traffic stop analysis report, as well as we publish monthly audits that we have on our website that gives the public access to be able to see what it is we're doing. Human Resources has tackled 2 major points. And one is to make sure that we have qualified candidates through our process, and the other is to ensure that the demographic of the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office reflects the demographic of the community in Maricopa County. And this is at all levels and all positions. This is not about checking boxes. This is a way of being. This is who we are. And we know that in human evolution, you never stop evolving. You never stop growing. Even when we accomplish those things that are on our list, it just means that there's something else to accomplish. There's something else that we need to do to continue to make ourselves better, to continue to grow those most important relationships within the community. And we know that in order to be successful in law enforcement, you need to have the support of the community itself.